And welcome back to the show. Founded in 1990, the Hispanic Federation seeks to empower and advance the Hispanic community, support Hispanic families, and strengthen Latino institutions through work in the areas of education, health, immigration, civic engagement, economic empowerment, and the environment. The organization works locally and statewide, as well as nationally, to strengthen Latino not-for-profits, promote public policy and advocacy, and then also bring a scale of portfolio of initiative community programmings. Well, joining us now to share more and discuss is the Vice President for Policy and Strategic Engagement at Hispanic Federation, Ingrid Álvarez. And Ingrid, good to have you.
Good, thank you for having me, Daren.
I am glad. And so listen, for those people who may not be so familiar with the Hispanic Federation, why don't we just first give a little overview as to who the Hispanic Federation actually is?
Great. So the Hispanic Federation, we're a national organization. Our area of expertise is we're institutional builders, and what that means is that we work and bolster and strengthen our Latino nonprofit sector across the U.S., specifically in all of the states that we live and we operate in, and that includes New York.
Yeah, and so you're all around and you're taking care of business for really the Hispanic population. Talk to me a little bit about some of the issues that we're dealing with, because I know that presently right now, as we talk in the United States, immigration is a huge issue nationally, but it's also a great issue locally.
It is, and so there's no question, right, that in this unprecedented pandemic that we're still living through, that COVID-19 has exacerbated our immigration work and the need. And there's also no secret, right, that for decades, our immigration system is just broken. It doesn't serve our citizens. It doesn't serve the millions of hardworking individuals and families that live in our country and contribute every day that are undocumented. And just most recently, we suffered a blow. The Senate parliamentarian had an opportunity to step up and create the opportunity for a pathway to citizenship that would alleviate the stressor of our broken immigration system on millions of people in our country. With that said, at the core of who we are at the Hispanic Federation, we're advocates. And so we continue to double down and stand strong in our advocacy to ensure that a comprehensive pathway to citizenship happens. In the interim, we've launched an unprecedented $1 million immigration legal defense fund nationally, and that fund aims to assist and aid and provide both the human capital, the legal representation, and the financial resources to countless of individuals and children on our borders, to address the backlog in our immigration courts to get their cases heard, and to create some form of relief in that system.
Yeah, Ingrid, tell me a little bit about this, because I've talked with our, political analyst, not our political analysts, and also our legal analysts as well. One of the things we talked about from the legal perspective is just this: when you talk about the court system and immigration cases, prior to COVID, it was already a backlog as it is. With COVID now coming into play, you have a lot of people who are hanging in the balance, a lot more people who want to really get in, and they, in essence, can't, simply because of COVID-19. So can you give me a little bit about how COVID-19 has really impacted the whole immigration work?
Well, I mean, the backlog, and that's an understatement at this juncture, right? And so part of the concern, right, is that the law says, right, we have the laws that immigration laws that should be honored. And while social distancing and COVID has created situations where, I mean, I don't know if you've seen it, sometimes on the media, there are images where you have, 5-year-old children without legal representation in front of an immigration court judge. That's just, it's just broken. And so what we're trying to do is that we've partnered with over 70 Bureau of Immigration Appeal accredited nonprofit organizations all across the country, including here in New York, And what accreditation affords a nonprofit entity that provides legal services to a community is free or low cost immigration services. It also allows for attorneys and pro bono and to actually pay for the legal representation. So whatever or wherever we can alleviate some of this backlog so that if a person is here and is seeking asylum, if there is a legal opportunity for a child through juvenile status to be able to adjust and continue on the continuum of our immigration court system, that happens. We can't hold people indefinitely. Most recently, we saw the atrocious images of Haitian refugees on the border in Texas. We have vehicles and pathways that if we wanted to create systems change, we could. To alleviate. It is not good economically, it's not good for us in our nation. And as I mentioned, just as of the decision in September through the Senate parliamentarian, hugely disappointing. We could have created an opportunity for at least 8 million people who served and continue to serve as essential workers, the opportunity to at least have their case heard.
Yeah. Let me do this and bring this issue to the forefront about COVID-19, because COVID-19 has had wide-ranging impacts for a lot of people, and particularly those in communities of color. When we look at immigration, we know that that was a hot button issue and how that's actually affected so many right here in our area. But talk to me a little bit about what you found to be some of the biggest challenges that COVID-19 has done in terms of impacting your work as well as your constituents.
So prior to COVID-19, right, Black and Brown communities historically have fared worse when it comes to health outcomes, when it comes to all of the social determinants of economic security. And what COVID-19 essentially has done, not only has exacerbated that, but unmasked this reality, right? That for some, you know, we just have not had enough traction in being able to turn around or create deeper impact around alleviating the root causes of inequities. And so, for example, in New York, right now, only about 53, 54% of Latinos within communities of color have actually received a vaccine, a shot in their arm. And so one of the ways that the Federation is responding to the need is our communities are hungry. They're hungry for information. They're hungry for access. And when people talk about vaccine hesitancy and why in communities of color, well, we need to meet folks where they are, right? Where they live, where they work. You know, our communities, our people need trusted faces and voices, our trusted faces and voices to share our own experiences with vaccination. With COVID-19. And one of the ways that we continue to work at that is that in partnership with the New York State Public Health Department, our network of Black and Brown community-based organizations, we have food distribution centers where we roll up with mobile vaccine units. At the very least, we're able in a culturally and linguistic manner connect with our people, talk about the importance of vaccination. You know, we continue to be the communities that die at the highest rates of COVID still today. Latinos in particular are impacted by COVID 4 times, you know, we have 4 times higher rate than our white counterparts. It impacts our ability to learn, it impacts our ability to work, it impacts our ability to take care of our children and our families and our communities. And so we launched, it's a campaign called La Vacuna Para Todos, that translates to the vaccine for all. And it's really a targeted approach in the way and manner that our people receive information in the trusted spaces. So whether it's the barbershop, whether it's the supermarket, whether it's at the food pantry, whether it's church, and co-locating it with the vaccine mobile unit and bilingual, bicultural folks that ultimately can lead to a person making the decision and saying, you know what, I'm gonna get vaccinated today, and facilitating it that way.
Are we hearing still a lot of hesitancy given the fact that we're now in the place where we're giving booster shots? Talk to me about hesitancy. Do you find that to be of great issue in the Latino Hispanic community?
So I'll preface it with, when I talk about hesitancy, yes, historically in this country, Black and Brown communities have had really negative outcomes that have led to serious trust issues with healthcare institutions and systems. But separate and apart from that and beyond that, where we are today with COVID-19, as I mentioned earlier, our people want information. There's a lot of misinformation out there. There's not enough information filtering through in the places where people are. People gotta work, people have to go to school, right? And if you meet them where they are and do that culturally and linguistically competent, then you're able to then arm them with the information. One of the things that also creates a person moving from, I'm not sure about being vaccinated because I don't have all the information, to I'll get vaccinated, is facilitating the vaccines in their neighborhoods. Right. These mobile units are critical, right? And the investment in those mobile units and making it, just because we make something accessible doesn't mean that it's available to us all. And so that's a huge part of hesitancy, and not to be misconstrued, whether our people don't necessarily or necessarily choosing not to vaccinate. It's just there are hurdles, right? And it's not necessarily available even when we're reading and we're seeing that something is made accessible. That's no different than, you know, back to the immigration issue, Daren, on how when federal support and federal response to COVID-19, both for workers and the business sector, were rolled out, that, you know, it locked out millions of folks. And so specifically, one example right here in New York is the newly launched Excluded Worker Fund. And so after much advocacy, with partners and members, and working with our Senate Majority Leader Schumer, New York State, possibly one of the first in the country, to establish and create an Excluded Workers Fund to support and provide relief benefit to essential undocumented workers in New York State. And at the Federation, we're a proud partner of that initiative. And talking about backlogs, you know, there was a 17-week backlog in the system. And so in order for someone who is an essential undocumented worker in New York State to be eligible for this fund, they need an ITIN number to apply. And so how do you apply when there's a 17 backlog? And so back to systemic change and creating processes that work for people to access support and benefits. We were able to, working with the IRS, remove that 17-week backlog, so anyone who's eligible can log on to the Department of Labor website or report to one of the 70 community partners working across New York to support undocumented workers to apply for these benefits, to do so.
Talk to me about undocumented workers for a minute, because we hear a lot about the word undocumented. And when you hear undocumented, there's a lot of myths and stereotypes that are associated with undocumented that I know that your organization really works to debunk. But can you give us a little bit about some of the myths and stereotypes that are associated with the undocumented and how you work to debunk that?
All right, so I'll define an ITIN. Sometimes we use jargon in the work, right? And so that's an individual tax ID number. And okay, if you are in this country and you are here without some form of legal status as our laws exist now, that doesn't prevent you from working. And if you do work, and many, if not all, of our documented brothers and sisters in this country work every single day, contribute to our local economies, and pay taxes. And so through that tax ID number, they pay their taxes. It's not a social security number, but for those of us in this country who are fortunate enough to have been born here, to naturalize, and we have our social security number, you know, undocumented workers, when they file their taxes, they use their ITIN number. Our undocumented community is an integral and critical part of our economic recovery, our economic stability, and any future economic growth. You know, and with that being said, when you have hundreds and thousands of them in New York State having been locked out during a national health crisis, right? These are the same people who cleaned our hospitals, who took care of our kids so many of us can go to work, who grow our food, who delivered our food, who cooked our food all throughout, and still today, as we navigate and continue to adjust and live and work in this new normal with COVID-19. And so, yeah, debunking myths is a critical component of our advocacy work, because everything I've just shared with you, Daren, fact, right? They pay taxes, they work, they contribute, they support local, state, and our national economy, and any building back a better plan nationally that we have as a country that is critical for us in moving forward from this pandemic is also centered around our undocumented brothers and sisters.
Yeah, and so the work continues. And so you got boots on the ground, you're really in the area of advocacy and policy. What can you tell our viewers about some of the things and the initiatives that you're presently working on?
Yeah. So one, thank you for helping us pass the word. So La Vacuna Para Todos is our New York vaccine campaign, and that's both outreach, education, and shots in arms, changing minds and hearts, and meeting our folks where they are to ensure we have a toll-free hotline, and that's 1-866-HF-AYUDA. That hotline is also you know, manned 24 hours round the clock in English and in Spanish, and anyone who may need assistance and things that they're eligible for the Excluded Workers Fund can reach us via that number. And then La Caminos de Esperanza. La Caminos de Esperanza is our legal defense fund. And that is also a critical component of our COVID-19 response. And so when you put needle and thread to all of our direct community initiatives, and you couple that with our advocacy work, our education campaigns, you know, it starts to comprehensively support our communities in both their journey to receiving, understanding, myth busting, and then making available, making accessible services and benefits that they are entitled to available. Another thing that we have just launched is the Hispanic Federation Redistricting Academy. You know, after every census, census numbers change, and with population changes comes the possibility that in any particular state you live in, that your House, Senate, and representative seats and district maps are redrawn. And so are your US congressional district maps redrawn. Sometimes our systems and our policies are very dense, very legal, and very complicated. And so the Hispanic Federation Redistricting Academy, it is our response to both our people in our communities where the rubber meets the road and our leaders whether they be community-based organizations, leaders like you, Daren, through this program, leaders in our faith-based communities, in all of our community spaces, to start to deconstruct those systems and processes so that we understand them, so that then we are also arming our people with either the positive or negative impact that redistricting or gerrymandering has on our communities, and then walking them through and arming them with the tools and the advocacy capacity to then go back to their districts, right, with their own redrawn maps and say, no, 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 right? And so that's another critical aspect of our work right now, and that's happening in every single community that we live and work in. And it has serious consequences when our people's voices are not at the table, when they're not part of the decision-making process. And oftentimes what we need to do is be that bridge, right? From this is what it is, this is how you do it, right? And supporting them through that journey so that they're advocating for the resources and the representation that they deserve.
Yeah. Ingrid, we got to leave it there. I want to thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum. Ingrid Álvarez from the Hispanic Federation, thank you so much for being with us and sharing with us. Listen, I cannot wrap this up without asking this one last question. You got me a quick answer. Behind you, I see the boom box. You want to just give us a little bit of history right there?
I am a proud native Bronx Latina, and hip hop is enmeshed and embedded in every fiber of what makes me who I am. And so let me just, since I've been working from home since COVID a lot, you know, and in beautifying my workspace and making it conducive, got the boombox in the back. It brings me joy. It reminds me of who I am and where I'm from. So yeah.
Well, I want to thank you for being with us and definitely represent. Got to have you back, Ingrid Álvarez. Thank you so much for being with us here on the Social Justice Forum.
Thank you for having me.
All righty, a quick break, everybody. Then we'll return with more show. We'll be back in a few.